Welcome to Ira Talk Jamaica, a current affairs media platform dealing with Jamaica and the Diaspora. This is a weekly program on Sundays from 4 to 6 p.m., dealing with issues of concern to Jamaicans at home and abroad, with additional posts and guests. Check us out also on our YouTube channel, Ira Talk Jamaica, and our collaborator, Sosa Bone Media Network. We now move to our host, Patrick McCarthy.
Thank you, Maxine. Welcome to our viewers. Welcome to Ira Talk Jamaica, right, where we discuss issues and matters that are relevant to us in Jamaica and across the diaspora. Today, we're gonna be looking at two areas primarily. First of all, we'll be looking at our culture and also, our entertainment industry in Jamaica. And to lead us off in that discussion, we're gonna have Maxine take it away.
I'm Maxine Stowe. I'm a Jamaica Diaspora cultural executive, curator, and rights advocate. And my work has spent decades at the intersection of music, heritage, and intellectual property, both in Jamaica and across international markets. I've worked inside the global music industry alongside artists, estates, and cultural institutions, and my focus has always been on the systems behind the culture. Who owns it? Who protects it? And what happens when it travels across borders through migration and diaspora? My segment looks at Jamaican culture not just as entertainment, but as heritage infrastructure shaped by law, history, economics, and lived experience. Here, we'll be connecting past and present to examine where cultural value is created, where rights fall behind, and what needs to change so that legacy, livelihood, and protection can finally align. When people think of Jamaica, they think of music, culture, resilience, rhythm. A country that has given the world far more than its size would suggest. But what we don't examine is what it costs to carry this cultural weight. This week, as Jamaica continues to assess the impact of Hurricane Melissa, we're reminded that culture doesn't live in the abstract. It lives in people. It lives in homes, in communities, in informal economies, in memory, and all of those are vulnerable when systems fail. I want to begin this conversation through the lens of Jimmy Cliff, who recently passed within the background of Melissa, not as a biography, but as a symbol. Jimmy Cliff represents a generation that helped place Jamaica on the global cultural map. His voice, his films, his music became part of the world's shared soundtrack. But global recognition does not automatically create protection. It doesn't guarantee security for cultural workers. It doesn't safeguard heritage spaces. And it doesn't ensure that when disaster strikes, culture is treated as infrastructure, even though it functions like one. Hurricane Melissa didn't just test Jamaica's physical systems. It exposed something deeper, the gap between how much Jamaica culture is valued globally and how little structural protection exists locally for the people and communities that sustain it. This segment is called Culture is Policy, because culture doesn't disappear. It gets mismanaged, and moments like this show us exactly where the gaps are. So when we talk about heritage, we have to move beyond nostalgia. Heritage isn't just what we celebrate. It's what we protect, what we document and what we govern. That's why I want to ground this conversation in the presence of Jimmy Cliff, not as a headline, not as a legend frozen in time, but as living evidence of how Jamaican culture has traveled, endured, and carried meaning across generations and borders. While culture travels freely, protection does not. Rights don't move as easily. And when crisis hits, the people suffer. We see that in the fact that post Melissa, all the major concerts and events were canceled. Sting, the major shows that happen every December and set the tone for the new year, Rebel Salute, and the dependency for recovery depended a lot on concerts in the diaspora, as was recently done in New York for Jamaica. It was called Jamaica Strong, and what was done in Miami, Florida. And all across the US, mostly, we've seen shows that are being curated, all engineered to be designed towards the recovery and rebuilding of Jamaica. Yet this music and these artists, especially their legacy, remains unprotected. And this is what we will be discussing alongside all of the other infrastructure and environments in relation to Melissa, Hurricane Melissa, and the recovery. So we'll go now to our panelists for comments and suggestions.
Yes, Reverend Maxine. Anybody want to lead off in the discussion? I have a couple of questions, but I'll yield to the other panelists to lead off with their question or comment.
All right, Maxine. You going last?
Go ahead, Herb. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, what I was saying is the Jamaican government response to Hurricane Melissa involved a systematic approach to gathering, collecting all the funds, and we hope that it will begin by taking monies that was not previously budgeted, that came from outside, where they can actually build housing to produce enough rooming for the people who were previously destitute, the people who lived in shacks. And we know that based on the environment that is in the Caribbean, with the inability to withstand the type of storms that we're having, we know that shacks won't survive anymore. So we're hoping that the government, and not the entertainment industry, will give the necessary long-term support to housing and to eradicating the poverties we saw produced in these areas from the storm. So the storm has shown us up pretty much and exposed that we're not all that, in spite of the successes in the entertainment industry. Pat?
Well, let me respond a bit to the comment in the sense that what the storm showed it was that the in respect of the diaspora is that the music industry and the artists are a leading responders, our leading first responders in dealing with raising funds and being, directly able to move to the communities alongside the first responders, from the government. We actually didn't know where the storm was going to hit, to say, well, okay, we heard it was moving for quite a few days or even a couple of weeks. But when and where it hit, no one knew. We had to be preparing as if it was going to hit Kingston. And then it was maybe Clarendon. And then finally, when it chose to hit, it hit in St. Elizabeth. But again, as you brought up the land policy and the state of the infrastructure, it does expose, especially where the music is concerned, because our culture and our musical expression generally comes from artists who are from these vulnerable communities, right? And so, it's interesting that Jamaica has been in a conversation about its land policy, because without ownership of land, persons can't build, formal infrastructure. So they build these shacks and they build these, board houses, because at any moment they may have to move, or they don't move, they don't build with security. So the whole issue of infrastructure and the type of, rebuilding, it brings in, it's not just in relation to what the hurricane did. It is in relation to the economy of these communities and why they exist in this manner in the first place. They're generally around major economic centers where people just gather, whether it's the tourism in Montego Bay or, the manufacturing companies, Spanish Town Road in, Kingston. People are just, seeking economic survival. So the whole intersection of music and poverty and economics, has been shown up in this Melissa crisis, because even these artists that have I've never seen so many music foundations formed in in such a and in such a short period of time. And my question, even to myself as an executive in the music industry, is what are these foundations going to be focused on after the recovery, effort has occurred?
Maxine, it's ironic that the people from the music industry have been the ones playing such a big role in the recovery after Melissa, because some of the issues that arise in terms of the issues that face the victims of Melissa arose because of neglect and arose because of historical situations like the historical landowner policy in the country. And when you look at those situations facing the people who are affected by Melissa, and you look at the music industry, you see some of the same kind of situations that face some of these artists who are now assisting. Because our music industry, as you mentioned, a lot of those artists come from the poorer areas of the country, and they face the same kind of neglect that lead people to build houses in river courses and gully banks, all of these things, right? So I can see where the connection comes in terms of the industry rallying to the assistance of people after Melissa, because the music industry participants literally have the same kind of history, the same history of neglect, wherein music in Jamaica for a long time was seen as something pulling tourists to the country and something the country can benefit from. But the people who are creating the music, right, were never, there was no effort on the part of the government to ensure that these people were properly trained, they had intellectual protection, they had benefits if something happened to them, you know. So it is ironic but understandable that at this point it is the music industry that stood up a lot for the victims.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, Maxine, before I say what I have to say, but I want to look at things from a different angle. When we think of Hurricane Melissa, we're primarily thinking about the aftermath. We're not thinking about the hurricane itself, right? And when we look at the bundling of the government in handling the situation, right, following Melissa, Melissa's timely visit to Jamaica, it is really deplorable. And I say that because the government clearly has no clue what their responsibility is. I mean, the most thing you think about when you think about a hurricane, right, and its impact is the immediate aftermath, right? To really stem the loss of life for starters, right? To do a clear assessment, immediate assessment, and to render relief as quickly as possible. And when I'm talking about rendering relief as quickly as possible, but yes, housing is important, but at the same time, the main thing is that you have to think about immediate shelter, you have to think about food, you have to think about water, right? And the government fell drastically short when it came to that. It makes you wonder, what if the hurricane had done that impact on a more densely populated area, more in the corporate area and those places? What would be the impact? Right? Because the government is not stepping up to their responsibility at all. Of course, that is one of the reasons why we see, you know, the entertainers, you know, really shining in this regard, because they have really had to take the lead. Right? There's no logistics, you know, put together. There was no preparation, no planning, no nothing. And that's clear.
Well, hurricanes have, and I'm here thinking about Jimmy Cliff because his first major hit was a song called Hurricane Hattie. In 1961, that again, and what I began to see, the pattern of hurricanes through Jamaica and the Caribbean, it's like they define policy. you know, they things that you don't, you have swept under the carpet and you don't want to deal with them. The hurricane comes and unmasks it. And it actually, even in terms of Jamaica, I don't remember which hurricane it was, but it actually was the reason why the Jamaica National Housing Trust was set up, to deal with the outcomes like what we're having now in relation to how building and, housing is restructured. And one of the things I was looking at now is what are the new policies that are going to come into place post Hurricane Melissa, because it also converged with a new election. We just had an election, I guess it was a month or, a couple of weeks before, that we were trying to figure out what direction the country is going to go into with, the type of outcomes of that election. And immediately came in Hurricane Melissa, wherein I'm not even clear yet, what is the policy. And then on top of Hurricane Melissa, we now have Hurricane Venezuela, again, impacting how we are going to recover, So it would be interesting for us on this program to be looking at the reshaping of the politics and the economics in the region. And from the diaspora, what certainly the entertainment shows is that, because the entertainment as an industry, it really reflects our diaspora. The entertainers and the industry may be the biggest, like the spear, the lens, but really we're talking about our diaspora, because even as much as they talk about tourism infrastructure, the North Coast was hit, with Montego Bay being the epicenter. Our diaspora is also being hit by the Hurricane Venezuela, in terms of just a descriptor, because 20% of our gross domestic product comes through our remittances and for the island of Jamaica. And the majority of our people are living in the blue states of America that are being impacted by, ICE policy, being impacted by, social services being removed, and almost like a civil war occurring in America. And we have no choice. It's not like we're Democratic or Republican. We actually live in the cities that are majoritively blue. So, for me, assessing all of this to investigate and interrogate through our program and, through our discussions, is like we have a blank blackboard, to shape, and this is why our program is important, to bring as much information as possible for decisions to be made, because a lot of decisions, are on very thin ice in terms of, our economics and our, for example, I know our oil policy, in terms of what is happening with Petrocarib. All of this is impacting while we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars seeking to restructure the electrical grid in Jamaica, And at the same time, we have to be wondering, well, we don't know what the Petrocaribe Venezuela oil, what do you call it, subsidies we're doing for our economy. But we're going to have to figure that out, you know? So a lot of these things are interrelated, even our artists being able to travel into America with the immigration restrictions that are now, you know, I think certain type of visas now you have to be putting up quite a bit, thousands and thousands of US dollars in order to come and get a work permit. So it is a very, you know, it's a very intriguing time, needing for us to have as much questions being asked and, you know, as much, nobody really has the answers, but we have to keep asking and investigating what we have in front of us.
There's a number of things that come to mind, Maxine, as we are in this discussion. We lift hard to the entertainers, particularly the ones who really stand up and really, demonstrate, right? Getting help to and relief to these hurricane victims. But one of the things we can clearly state, right, and this is, we can not just state it, but be emphatic about it, that our entertainment industry really was born out of a need for economic opportunities for development. I mean, our artists primarily, center their entertainment around the experiences of the people, the hard experiences of the people, right? And to bring liberation, to bring relief to our people. I mean, all our artists pretty much have geared their work in that direction. And when you think about it, it's no surprise that yet again, entertainers are the ones who really stand up, and say, well, let's do what we can to get help to the people. Mm-hmm. And this is really speaking in volumes. It is saying a lot. Right? It is saying a lot, and it is really showing us how drastically short our government falls, right, when it comes to this matter.
As you're speaking, I'm seeing that, as entertainers, we operate in the informal, economic sector a lot. And government, and even to a certain extent, private sector, has to go through a lot of red tape, procurement, this, that. Their money, I guess, government has emergency funds, etc. And there was a lot of issues in relation to where the hurricane hit and the political divide, because, how the money was distributed. I think they were arguing before the hurricane hit because of the change in the amount of representation in this new government, even though the JLP retained
majority
in charge of the government, the PNP seats and, governance in local government, etc., increased dramatically. So they were actually arguing about how, the committees and the monies were going to be spent, etc., when the hurricane hit. And a lot, I don't even know where it is now, but there was a lot of pushing and shoving about where the aid was going, etc. And within all of that, it was the artists, the informal economy, that was, that was filling the gaps.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just adding to what you're
but
saying,
here's
and the reason why.
Yeah. Here's one of the burning lessons, right, coming out of this experience again, right, when it comes to the government, right, and the savagery of politicians, right? Here it is. When you're campaigning for an election, you can afford to be partisan. When you're the government, there's no partisanship to it. There's no partisanship to it. This thing is not personal, right? It is not, it doesn't belong to them personally to determine what needs to be done. There's a job that they're elected to do. And they can't be personal about it.
But I think certainly in this respect, the fact that we're just coming out of the campaign where, in a campaign, you go the hardest against, each side, Thank God we have matured and it wasn't shooting after each other.
Well, if we call that maturity,
well, they call it maturity, that,
again, like I said,
they bought a lot of votes. But,
the savagery of politicians.
Yeah, the lack of maturity.
We're talking about people's lives.
Yeah.
That's what we're really talking about. We're not talking about parties.
I almost felt that Melissa and the destruction nullified the whole election process, because it put the people and their development over party politics. However, the reality is that the government that is in charge is the one, because there was a reluctance to create the bipartisan committees, to be in charge of the recovery process. I remember at one point
there's still no bipartisan committee.
I think they were saying PJ Patterson and Golden, and they were trying to create some kind of platform, but what has actually come out of it is almost like the dominance of the governing party, and now it's under the cover of the rebuilding economy with massive amount of loans and IMF, and and all of these decisions are only being made by the governing party. And it's interesting, they were also pointing out that every major hurricane that has hit Jamaica has benefited the JLP party. They have been in the government, in those periods. But that's another thing to observe, you know what I mean? Because I think even this week in the media, social media, they were saying that the PNP party has become very silent. Like they haven't, the promotion of the recovery is almost like another campaign element, and I don't know what your experience, has been observing what's happening on the ground in Jamaica in that respect.
It's what's it showing is the continued lack of transparency when it comes to the government in relation to hurricane relief. Because one of the things about disasters is that when disasters strike, you always have in the recovery period a lot of spending, as you mentioned, a lot of procurement has to be done, a lot of people from different communities and sections of the island have to be assisted. In such a situation, the desirable thing is to have some form of independent management of anybody that is overseeing the relief. And the situation up to now is that the government has been resisting the formation of any broad-based group, leadership group to oversee the recovery, right? And the redevelopment in the particular affected communities. What I notice is that in the media, you're always seeing some politician from the government side mainly handing out stuff, giving housing, giving benefits. Relief shouldn't be a political thing for whether the opposition or the government to be gaining are trying to make political capital out of. Whatever relief is due to the people, it should flow freely without anybody having any feeling. Because we are not saying that they are issuing things on a partisan basis. What we are saying is that to avoid the semblance of partisanship, the relief effort, right, should be conducted by some form of body or some leadership group that people can feel or see as being fair and not controlled by either the government or the opposition. And to date, that is lacking.
And I guess that points to the weakness of civil society in Jamaica, you know, because I don't think the church, even though the church is known as a social welfare channel, I haven't really seen that the church has, I know they tried to create a committee again, like with Bishop Blair, and, you know, there was all of these announcements for these particular organizations to arise. But even as we're discussing it now, I'm realizing that none of them have been actioned. It was just a lot of announcements, but none of them have been empowered because of the political reality. I don't, I mean, like they would say, a doctor can't perform surgery on himself. You know what I mean? So, you can't ask the person who is in that mode, you know what I mean, to say, oh, act beneficially. It would have to be a policy that acts, that suggests that. And it is showing that our civil society it's probably too fragmented. We don't have a strong central civil society
I've seen a few of them, few of the organizations have been calling for that broad-based committee, but the fact is that the government has not even budged or even shown any inclination towards that. So I believe some of these people just resign themselves to thinking that, you know, continuously calling for it and nothing is happening, I don't know. And probably that's why you mentioned that some people are saying the PNP has gone silent on the issue, because they were calling too, but to date, there has been no real shift in the government policy, because the overseeing body that they named comprised of mainly government ministers and people from organizations connected to the government. So,
And
you
let me interject that the biggest thing that happened with the hurricane and with the entertainers and with the police and with the politicians is the disruption in the underground economy, right? You now see clearly that the government is dependent on its cyber security monitoring that has turned up different culprits using drug trafficking, and I'm sure they're going to run into those that use human and weapons trafficking as well. But the underground economy being disrupted was how a lot of folks existed, right? They could sell certain things to or trade, barter, or whatever. And that's not possible now because they have no place to operate from, no place where they live, right? No roof over their heads. And so they're now susceptible to the gangsters that want to use them to peddle, whether it's drugs or give up kids for trafficking. So you have to start thinking now, how was the government monitoring Western Jamaica before it came apart? Because we saw there were problems in finding communities, which was unbelievable. They could not find whole communities in Western Jamaica. And they were highly dependent on the JDF and the US Chinook helicopter flying overhead, people waving them down and calling to them and forcing them to land and then document that people were where they had no idea the people were. Now, I can tell you that the software they use to pinpoint criminals is working very well because they have killed over 310 people, and the police has not shown a single police car that was shot up in the so-called gunfight that they were supposed to be involved in arresting these folks. So we have to assume then that the police went to these locations with overwhelming force and took these people out. All right. If there was a sign that the policeman had a bullet hole in his vest or a dent in his vest or something, they could convince me that they did not ambush the majority of these people. So that same system that they use to pinpoint where the criminals are, right, can be used to pinpoint where all the Jamaicans are simply by using geolocation. When the helicopters fly overhead, it can map all those areas where people are located. So we don't have the same problem again.
So what you're saying, Herb, if I'm understanding you clearly, is that one of the lessons to be learned from what's been happening on the part of the government is that let's say for accounting for loss of life or, accounting for missing individuals, that this software method would work very well in doing that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is very accurate.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that in light of a number of people still being unaccounted for.
Yep. You see,
What I
the
would,
government, what's that database the government wants to build up?
NIDS?
NIDS, yes. See, now they want people, force people, if you want to get your ID card back, you got to bring your documents and register with NIDS. Right? There's two ways to get your stuff populated, and you have the majority of it is going to be with the voters database and the driver's license database. Between those two databases, you should have most of your locations and your families already registered. Now, to validate that, you can have, I think Mona has the geolocation data that they and Google put together so that they could create all the routes that's used in Jamaica. So you can't get lost no more, supposedly, going through the mountains and stuff like that. But the bottom line is, if they're going to fix things, they have a problem. Because most of the money is claimed that was used up for the elections. Government did not even put food in the shelters that they created. People had to be hustling for food after the hurricane.
Or have adequate shelters.
Or have adequate shelters. Shelters, them roof got blown off, water coming, and all kinds of stuff was happening. So we never had a system that safeguarded the residents. And so the residents had to go hustle for themselves. Matter of fact, I couldn't believe the amount of blankets they were handing out in that place. And the bottom line was the generators that were given to government by Japan and others, they disappeared, and they claimed that they gave it to businesses. But if the businesses are wiped out, which businesses did you give it to? The ones in Kingston that didn't need it? That's what bothers me, right? There is no accountability. There is no transparency. And they do have the ability to document and to, in detail, where all this stuff is going.
But here's the thing, Herb. If you say there's no accountability, but for starters, there can be no accountability because nothing was done.
Well, that is true.
not
But
only that,
they claim, 1 second, Mac. They claim $225 million worth of food was distributed. $225 million worth of food. I would love to hear from World Food Kitchen what their grand total was. Because we know they were feeding in excess of 50,000 people a day. So if you match what World Food Kitchen was doing and the expense, you would have some idea how much $225 million should have taken care of in Jamaica. Sorry, Maxine.
no. I mean, a couple things are coming at me because even when they talk about the hundreds of millions to feed the people, you have to realize that those hundreds of millions would have been going through the supermarket food system, right?
Yeah.
And so what you're looking at is and what they would be struggling after or within is this giving of food through a different system, or a system that was broken down because the shops, the roads were non-existent. It's creating an economic problem for the supermarkets, or not the supermarket, the distributors, the wholesalers,
Right.
the Grace Kennedys, etc. So what I heard them having to do is to try to develop a voucher system out of this crisis to balance back the economy of, even if you're giving away the food free, you still have to make it link to the system, the existing system of distribution. So even these tons and tons of sardine or whatever water that were being flown in and not having, a proper distribution, because the only distribution that is going into these communities is through the little mom and pop shops. You understand?
Yeah.
Getting from the hook, and that has been disrupted. Now you have these tons and tons of things at the airports coming in to distribute to these people. So it would be the same Grace Kennedy truck or the same D&G, to go in, that now is the small people, the artists, these convoys lined up with, everybody. I was looking at it and saying, oh, wow, this is not what it seems. Even the hiccups, you understand, because there's no alternative. And even I was involved with looking for a missing person in Jamaica. And the amount of nook and cranny, especially in the countryside, you understand, where people, through, just like how they're on the gully banks, it's so they're on the hillsides and they create their own tracks and their own, you understand, methods of getting to these homes that are, creating these homes. Then the politicians will follow for the votes, you understand, and then they will, create some infrastructure, because now you have a body of people who have developed these informal settlements, not simply on the coastline. You have a lot of informal settlements now in on the hillsides, on that side. And then a lot of these roads were subject to landslides, etc., because they're not planned communities. They're just people, creating communities for themselves. So their lack of ability to be reached was real. They're not no real road. You understand? And whatever infrastructure that was put in because these communities are now important. Their first importance on the political level is that they're communities of voters. Not that it was done properly, or, it is very interesting, as we were saying, the exposure. So even the database, the satellites that came in and saw these pockets of people and communities that were cut off, you have to analyze, did they have any road to get there? How washed, they were literally marooned. And why were they marooned? Because those are not planned communities. And then it exposes now, what are you going to do with these communities? Are you going to relocate them? Or are you going to build proper infrastructure to get to them?
But
because then, it's a very...
But here's the thing, Maxine. Here's the thing. I'm pretty sure, even if there weren't organized communities on the level that we may be thinking of. There were communities of sort in that they had voters there, they had elections in the area. I mean, elections were just held.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm pretty sure once people lived there was election activity going on there. Right?
But
So it can't be a matter
they were
that
able to go there because the roads were there.
But it can't be a matter that they didn't know of the existence of these places before they were here.
No, they knew them. But in terms of planning to get to them or planning for those people to leave, to go to the shelters.
Well, to that point, let me ask you this. I don't know if you have an answer for this question, but are you aware of who is the person responsible for disaster preparedness? This organization that's running out of the Prime Minister's office.
Well, it was the OPD, what they call it, the
OPDEM or something like
that. ODPEM, ODPEM.
That would be like FEMA over here, in America. ODPEM. And I think they moved the person, and then they put in somebody from the army. And then
but who? We don't know who that person is. All we know is that it's under the Prime Minister's office.
No, that person that was moved from the army was responsible for the disaster response from the army level, because the army in Jamaica, like the engineer corps and whatever, it's not just to fight war or whatever. They are there also to assist in these crises like earthquakes.
Yes, but
I think it's that unit within the army that this guy that they moved over was a specialist, and because it was the army that was being depended on in most cases to get to the.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, do you know who he is, and have you heard anything from him?
Well, he was hardly, because you see, when the issue became about the money. Yeah, that is where I saw that he got silent, because his issue may be more infrastructure. But the questions were coming up about the money being collected and not being used. Right? So OPDM or whatever they were,
But
maybe there's a lot of money that is targeted, but it's still not, it's like you have a drain, like you have a sink, and the drain is clogged, right? And it's clogged because you don't have the proper infrastructure to distribute.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean, we hear these things, these bits and pieces. But again, as I was saying with Herb earlier on, there's no accountability because there's nothing going on.
There's no infrastructure. There's
nothing. There's just nothing.
Yeah, but all right.
Just a lot of talk, nothing else.
Yeah, but in terms, I'm agreeing with you. I'm only trying to look at why there is nothing there.
Look, we saw this guy appear before Parliament, and they asked him a lot of questions, especially the PAC, I believe it's called, right? Questions that he really wasn't prepared to answer. This guy was not a statistician. He probably didn't have one. And so he was unable to come up with the rapid fire answers that was needed while he was in front of the Parliament. He's a Coast Guard commander. I don't know I think he's retired, that they called up and replaced the original leadership in ODPEM that had been preparing for this hurricane. Keep in mind, it was Minister Mackenzie that was responsible to move people to higher ground, so to speak, move them to proper stable areas where you had buildings that could withstand category 3 or 4. But the fact that this was a 5 and it was stationary, moving less than 5 miles an hour, destroyed all of that. So the question is, if they weren't prepared, if there was no food, if there was no blankets, if there was no beds, nothing at all in these locations for these people, right? What is the government's new plan concerning the rebuilding standards for engineering and the fact that we have hotels that are vacant, that they could have housed people, and then you would have one location where you're doing food, shelter, medical attention, and you would have a more focused people that you are helping to recover. You would have them out of the area. We saw babies, saw women. I wonder where the men were. Some men were there, but the older men. But these women and babies were in the filth, in the water, in the contaminated streams, dead animals. All kinds of stuff was there. And the government is telling me that they could not move them into some shelter, particularly the hotels. The hotels would have been the first choice, because if you're going to have a hotel empty, large hotel at that, then that's where you should move your people, and that's where you should take care of them.
But that only happens when you have organization. And if you don't have organization to begin with, none of that can be realized.
Happens when you have a heart, Patrick. When you think about your people first.
Yeah.
Right? That's what should have happened. Right? But it's not even happening now. I wonder, when you give all these supplies to these people, where were they supposed to store it? In a broken down shack? I mean, where did all the supplies go? How can the people manage when they have been impacted in such a way that there's no logistics, there is no admin that there to help them, and they're just out there? You can bring and set up hospitals in the area, but the area is still impacted. People still need food, shelter, and clothing, and medical help. So this so-called organization, this so-called that they spent 225 million, is beyond belief.
That's the question, Herb. The lack of oversight in the whole operation, because who is going to verify what the government spent or did not spend? Who is going to verify that the supplies that came into the island were in fact distributed to which particular organization? There is nothing in place right now for that kind of verification.
Nothing.
It just reminds me of when they, Morocco sent the fertilizer.
Yeah.
Right? To be distributed to the farmers. And where it ended up was with in particular areas covered by the JLP and for their specific farm use. Right? So how can we say we're taking care of our people when there's no track and tracing done? You should be able to show us on a map, and an overlay on that map should show the distribution routes and how much dropped off in each of those western parishes.
Yeah.
I haven't seen no such presentation by the government. None. Well,
the next thing is going forward. Going forward with the redevelopment of those areas. When it comes to contracts, who's going to oversee the giving of contracts? Who is going to approve of the contractors? Where are the contractors going to be drawn from? I mean, all of this has to be sorted out and be transparent, because you can't have a diaspora who is contributing so much. You can't have international donors who are contributing so much. You can't have people in Jamaica, both business and individuals, contributing so much, and you can't tell them where the stuff that they have contributed has gone or is going, or you can't tell them who's going to get a contract to build in certain areas, to move stuff in certain areas, to provide food in certain areas. Going forward, that has implications for trust and for support from all of these groups when something else happens in the country. Because if we cannot account to all these people as to where their donations have gone, I mean, that's not good for the country.
Yeah. What's clear is that, you know, we really could talk all night on this subject, but you know, one of the things that's clear, right, is that yet again, we see where the government is woefully short when it comes to dealing with their responsibility. You know, we just gonna have to leave it there for the moment and move on. But of course, it is something that we'll definitely have to revisit in a later program. Right.